Over the course of the pandemic, there have been quite a few high-profile opponents of lockdowns and public health measures, which we needed to limit the spread of COVID. So Julia Hartley-Brewer come to mind, Toby Young comes to mind, people who were saying, no, these lockdowns are nonsense, it's all false positives, COVID isn't that big a deal, it's just like flu. This, for most of the pandemic, has been a pretty elite pastime in a way. So you've had lots of people agitating for this, often promoted in newspapers like the Daily Telegraph, but the overwhelming majority of the public have been actually very much in favor of lockdowns when they're needed and very much in favor of strong public health measures to resist a disease which they see as a real and significant threat. However, this weekend in London, we saw a protest against lockdowns and against COVID restrictions, which looked quite a lot bigger than anything we've seen before. So we can take a look at the images there. So this isn't just Julie Hartley-Brewer in her talk radio studio. This is a significant number of people. The demonstration was organised under the banner of Unite for Freedom, and several thousand people turned up. Reporting tended to put it at around 10,000 people, which is fairly significant. The key demands, and which everyone there seemed to agree on, was being against lockdowns and being against vaccine passports. Also, many people there against vaccines in general, or people skeptical about COVID altogether. So it was a bit of a motley crew. I have to say, though, fairly surprised at how diverse it looked. Let's take a look at some footage from the Twitter account Urban Pictures of the event.
We are the people! We are on your side! We have nothing to gain by spreading this information! We are on your side! We are trying to help you! Switch off the television! Switch off the television!
Resist!
Resist! Comply! Do not comply! No problem, so let's just peacefully protest like the peaceful people that we are.
They're not the 99% because actually their views are quite marginal. That's the last thing I heard there. As I say, lots of young people there, young people, old people. It looked pretty diverse in terms of ages. You also saw there, you might have recognised Piers Corbyn, Jeremy Corbyn's fairly cranky brother, and Laurence Fox. Both of them, in fact, standing to be London mayor. I think both hovering at around 1% in the polls. You might have spotted some of the banners. There says one saying no masks, no vaccines, no lockdowns. Obviously fairly incoherent because you're going to have a lockdown unless you have masks and vaccines. I suppose these people were never famed for their coherence. Some other signs that we sort of picked out when we slowed it down. Someone had written "Plandemic, Deep State Cabal, Paedophiles, We See You." So that's clearly a sort of QAnon type right-wing conspiracy theory via the United States. And another one had a picture of Boris Johnson and a vaccine. It said, "Why are we taking health advice from people who believe in overpopulation?" Which is not actually an idea I can particularly associate with Boris. I was thinking more David Attenborough when I saw that. But I think that's more about some big mass conspiracy, the establishment. We can go to some of the main characters to look at what they're saying about these things, because I think actually the most significant question here is vaccines. The lockdown's almost ending anyway, right? So there is a case of how slowly do we remove the restrictions, but is this an anti-vaxx movement? That's probably what's most important in terms of public health. Laurence Fox on this one, who we just mentioned. So he tweeted last week, sharing a picture of his invite to get a vaccine. He says, "I'm busy that day, I'm afraid. There's no need to vaccinate the healthy, much as there was no need to quarantine the healthy. This stupidity needs to stop." Now, again, that's the kind of attitude which is going to leave us in lockdowns much longer than we need to be. Ash, we have become used on this show to sort of discussing the Julie Hartley-Brewers of the world, the sort of lockdown skeptics who are often paid by Rupert Murdoch or by big, often sort of landlord interests, people who are desperate to get people back to the office. But it hasn't seemed like a popular movement. But that did look both quite big and quite, I don't want to say representative. I mean, it looked mainly white people from the video I showed, but not only, and that the age spectrum seemed quite significant. Do you think it was significant what we saw?
I mean, let's just deal with the Laurence Fox thing head on, all right? Yeah. Because the man is a fucking numpty. I'm sorry. There's no need to vaccinate the healthy. What do you think a vaccine is? You didn't give the smallpox vaccine to people who already had it. That's not how vaccines work. You literally vaccinate the healthy. That's what you're supposed to do. Anyway, I digress. It's just, I think when you see somebody who has permanently damaged the bit of their brain which is capable of processing shame, and they can just say any old shit, it does wind me up, which is precisely what he wants. So there we go. Who's the real loser here? It's me. I think that if you're looking at the kind of crowds that we saw at the weekend at the anti-lockdown protests, and you try and assign one explanatory factor, you're always going to be missing out a whole load of stuff. Now, obviously, these aren't people with whom I share values, politics, and I think most, all of them really have been misled by false and unreliable and sometimes downright dangerous and conspiratorial information. However, I think that there are lots of different things which have driven people there. I think one aspect of it is to do with civil liberties. I think there have been a lot of people, including people who are very well regarded, who, for instance, are part of the left, who have worked on civil liberties campaign, who've always seen the kind of, coronavirus powers as being potentially dangerous. Which ones of those will become permanent? Which ones of those will result in some kind of government overreach? So there's some really legitimate fears there, which then get turned into, I think, and distorted into a wider, completely blanket anti-lockdown point of view, and even a conspiratorial one. It doesn't change the fact that in there somewhere is a seed of plausibility, if not truth. So I think that that's one thing that's driving people there. I think another, and this explains, for a lot of young people why they're there, is that there's a complete, I think, lack of trust in shared sources of information. The public sphere has been, I think, utterly degraded, not just by social media and, online fake news, but by people who consider their jobs as journalists fundamentally to be holding the public to higher standards of accountability than those with power. I think what that's resulted in is a sense of, well, who's looking out for us? You can't trust anybody. I'll make my own mind up. And again, that is something which I think can make people quite vulnerable to misinformation and conspiratorial thinking. It doesn't mean that there's not, again, a seed of plausibility or a seed of truth there in terms of what led to that breakdown in trust, but it can leave people in a really, really vulnerable position. And then I think you've got this broader mood, which is, I think, a state of denial. And it's something that we saw from the very start of this pandemic in a much milder way. It was something that I kind of experienced myself, because think about it, Michael, for our lives, right, living here in this country, the age that we are, what impact have pandemics had on our lives before, right? Zero. When it came to things like SARS or bird flu, because we were so insulated from it here in the West, it was almost like it was kind of a dud. So we didn't register it in the same way. It never felt truly real in the same way. And so I think that there was this kind of base level of disbelieving, which made it hard to adjust to the reality and the seriousness of just what it is we were dealing with. Now, most people adjusted to that really quickly and got their heads around what was happening. But I think for a lot of people, that sense of disbelieving, that sense of unrealness persevered. And again, it was something which made them particularly vulnerable and amenable to more conspiratorial ways of dismissing the whole thing. And it comes from a place of, well, I don't want to change my life to accommodate this new shared social reality. So why should I? Why should I? I would rather that this wasn't happening. And in a consumerist society, you're quite used to being able to go, I want this, I don't want this, and that being what you do or do not get. So I think that that's another thing which drives people being out there. So yeah, I think a lot of these people are dangerous. I think they're wrong-headed. I completely disagree with them. But I think that there's a spectrum almost, and people don't start off being complete cranks. I think that there are seeds of plausibility which get amplified, distorted, warped, built on, and indeed then they blossom into something which is a lot more harmful.